I'm Brent Goff. It's good to have you with us on this Thursday. Polls have now closed in Bangladesh's first national election since the uprising that ended Sheikh Hasina's 15-year rule. More than 127 million people were eligible to vote. Now, with Hasina's Awami League now banned, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, led by Tarique Rahman, entered the race as the front runner. The BNP is one of the country's two major political forces. It is pitching itself as a nationalist conservative alternative. Its main challenger is an 11-party alliance, which is led by the Islamist Jamaat Islami, headed by Shafiqur Rahman. Now, security is tight nationwide, with nearly 1 million personnel deployed after unrest broke out at several polling stations across the country. Yeah, a lot to unpack here. Let's go now to our correspondent, Nimisha Jaiswal. She is in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka, for us. Nimisha, I know that polls have now closed. What do we know so far about how the voting went, particularly turnout?
Well, Brent, turnout is that big question because that would really tell us how legitimate or how even interesting voters have found this vote when it comes to the candidates who are in the running. But the latest figures, and as of after closing, which happened 30 minutes ago, have not really been provided yet. The last numbers we have are from 2 p.m. That's about 2.5 hours before polls closed, and that is at about 48%. So not a stellar number, but this is not particularly surprising because we've been out and about at polling stations in Dhaka. In the morning, there was a massive rush, but when we asked different polling officers how far the turnout has come along as of 3 p.m., as of 3:30, it looks like it was still at about 35%. But what's interesting here is that how fair this vote is the other question that's really going to come up. There have been reports of instances of violence. Each party has made allegations. There's even an allegation that a BNP person might have been killed. There's also allegations of clashes where different leading parties have been involved. And right now, as of a few minutes ago, the head of the 11-party alliance, Jamaat, has gone to the election commission alleging widespread irregularities, including fake voters. So this is, of course, very concerning. Now, both leading parties have said that they think they will accept a vote that is free and fair unless something goes really wrong. And that caveat is what might spell out how easily this result can be declared.
Yeah, and with all of that in mind, I know you've been talking to voters. What have they been telling you?
It's really interesting, Brent, because the people we actually meet, of course, are people who have come out to vote, and that low voter turnout means that we have not been able to speak to the people who are skeptical of this election. We were just speaking to the candidate at this constituency. He said he's from a third party. He said he's definitely not going to win, but he thinks 30% of people did not come out because they are Awami League supporters from Sheikh Hasina's government, and they think that they do not want to vote because their party is not on the ballot. The Awami League is banned. But when it comes to the people we spoke to, there was a palpable air of excitement. Several people told us that even though they've been eligible to vote for the last few elections, every time they went to cast their vote, it was already cast. This is a clear allegation of vote rigging that has come up in the last 3 elections. So they seemed really excited that this was the first free and fair election. And when we spoke to polling officers from each party that are at these booths too, they said that they think it's been quite peaceful and free and fair here in Dhaka. And when it comes to what voters really want, we asked them what they hope for from the next government. And let's listen into their answers.
We need change here. We need change in this country because we've seen what the previous governments did. So we want someone new to come and lead the country.
What do you mean by that? Less corrupted. Wherever we go for any work, especially government work, we have to pay a lot of money outside the book. We don't want to. Less corrupted Bangladesh is better Bangladesh.
My hope for today's election is a better Bangladesh, a more honest, less corrupted Bangladesh.
I want that they look after the general public. There should be no difference between the poor people and the rich people. Everybody should be treated at the same level.
Past regime, of course, there were many problems. So now we are looking for the 5 fundamental rights. We want to ensure for everybody.
And Amisha, we hear right there is so much on the line in this election, so many concerns. What comes next for Bangladesh?
Well, what comes next for Bangladesh will really be decided by who actually wins and what direction they want to take. But that might be a bit too soon to talk about that right now, Brent, because what we really want to find out is what is the turnout number? How serious are these allegations? Are they going to contest while counting is going on right now? Now, behind me is a polling booth where there have been 10 different polling centers around here, and we just saw ballot papers being carried from the counting, from the ballot casting space to the counting space. So we know that right now in the next hours, counting will happen. Maybe in a few hours, we already might know who's leading. And there is a prediction from analysts here that whoever's falling behind is more likely to raise allegations of some kind of vote rigging or vote tampering.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens when the numbers are in. Namisha Jaiswal for us in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Namisha, thank you. At NATO, they are talking a lot these days about the Arctic. Defense ministers are meeting in Brussels and topping their agenda NATO's new mission known as Arctic Sentry. Now, the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, he is chairing today's talks as the alliance puts plans in place to boost its military presence in the far north. The deployment is an effort to smooth over a recent rift between the U.S. and other NATO allies, a rift over Donald Trump's plans to annex Greenland. The U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, he will not be at today's meeting. He's being represented by Undersecretary Elbridge Colby. Hegseth did not provide a reason for his absence. Well, speaking as he arrived for the meeting in Brussels, Mark Rutte said this.
What you see overall is a picture of Canada and Europe stepping up, spending billions more on defense, ramping up the defense industrial base, keeping Ukraine strong. So I think this is very important. We will take stock today and then chart out the course towards our summit.
All right, let's go now to Terry Schultz. She is at NATO headquarters for us in Brussels. Terry, good to see you. So let's talk about the no-show. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he is not attending. So what is the U.S. message there?
That's right. Pete Hegseth decided to skip the meeting just after his counterpart, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, skipped the foreign ministers' meeting. So this, of course, does give rise to a lot of questions about whether the Trump administration is trying to signal to NATO that it doesn't consider itself a priority. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made excuses for the administration, saying people are simply too busy. The U.S. has to keep its eyes focused on all parts of the world, and so it's not surprising that they are missing this meeting. Now, as you mentioned, Deputy Defense Secretary Elbridge Colby is here, and he actually was quite upbeat on his arrival in remarks with Rutte. He said that, it's great that NATO countries have now agreed to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, a move, of course, pushed by President Trump. And he said, now it's time to show that we can really step out together. He did refer to the U.S. National Defense Strategy, which he called realism, and said that he hoped that NATO move forward in this spirit. But anyway, I would guess that most defense ministers are thinking could be worse. We don't know what he's saying in the closed room, but certainly speaking in a more optimistic tone about NATO than we've heard from a lot of Trump administration officials.
So the U.S. Defense Secretary is not there. Ukraine's new defense minister is there. How much support can he expect from the alliance?
That's right. Minister Fedorov is here meeting his defense minister counterparts for the first time in his new position, and he will be getting a lot of support. The UK has just announced a new air defense package for Ukraine just today, and there will be a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group after defense ministers wrap up. That's a group now co-chaired by the UK and Germany following the decision by the United States not to continue in that role. So there will be a round of speeches about just what new contributions NATO countries are going to make to Ukraine. And of course, a lot of that will be focused on the Pearl packages, the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, which has European countries paying for the most advanced, ready-to-buy equipment from the United States. That's something that NATO believes is working well to get the most important equipment to Ukraine as fast as possible. So we'll be hearing more about that later today when there's a press conference with the Ukrainian Defense Minister. Brent.
Okay, our correspondent Terry Schultz there at NATO headquarters in Brussels for us. Terry, as always, thank you. But there were heated exchanges on Capitol Hill Tuesday. At the center of it all, the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi defended how her boss, U.S. President Trump, and her own Justice Department have handled the release of the millions of documents tied to the investigation of Epstein. Bondi deflected lawmakers' questions about redacted names, many of which are suspected of being high-profile politicians. However, many names of Epstein's victims, they were not blacked out. And some of those victims, they were at yesterday's hearing. Take a look.
Now, would the survivors and victims who are here please stand up one more time? Just by show of hands, how many of you or your loved ones actually have met with the Department of Justice and provided testimony and estimate and evidence? None. And of those of you who have not met, which is everyone, how many of you have reached out either individually or through a lawyer or representative to offer to provide testimony and evidence? All of them. And of those of you, all of you who have reached out, how many of you were denied or ignored by the Department of Justice? All of them.
So, with that in mind, we spoke with Dr. Mark Shanahan. He's an associate professor of political engagement at the University of Surrey in the UK. Here's what he said when asked whether the Department of Justice is compelled to reach out to survivors.
They should be, given the amount of evidence that they had. I mean, particularly since the death of Epstein. Investigations into him have been going on for 20 years now, long before he allegedly took his life in 2019. But since that time in 2019, when Trump was president, there have been many calls for investigations into his actions. I mean, he was awaiting trial. There was a lot of evidence was building up of his sex trafficking, of his interactions with underage girls, of his involving so many important and powerful men, older men largely, in his activities. So there was no reason for the DOJ not to reach out. It didn't really happen under that first Trump administration. But there again, it also didn't happen under Joe Biden, when again, all of this information was available, but it wasn't being acted on by the government's chief prosecutors.
That was Mark Shanahan there from the University of Surrey in the UK. Let's take a quick look now at some of the other stories that are making headlines around the world. WhatsApp says that Russia has tried to fully block the online messaging service. Authorities in Moscow are instead pushing a state-backed rival app, which critics claim could be used to track users. Russia has been limiting foreign-owned platforms, accusing them of refusing to share information with law enforcement in fraud and terrorism cases. 2 people have been killed in an attack on a commercial plane in Indonesia's Papua province. A police spokesman said that assailants opened fire as the aircraft was landing. The pilot and co-pilot were killed as they fled with passengers into a nearby forest. We understand that all passengers were unharmed. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order directing the Pentagon to buy electricity from coal-fired power plants. He says preserving coal plants will protect jobs. Trump campaigned for re-election on a promise to support domestic coal production. And a quick reminder now of our top story. The polls have closed in Bangladesh's historic election that will make or break. It's make or break the return to democracy. It's the first vote since the student-led protest back in 2024, protest that ousted the authoritarian former prime minister. You're watching DW News. I'll be back at the top of the hour with more world news. I hope to see you then.